The book is a biography of Sachchidanand Hiranand Vatsyayan Agyeya, unarguably one of the most remarkable figures of Indian literature. The book is about his multiple lives, his life as a revolutionary, as a writer, as an army man, and and father of modernism in Hindi literature, and his grand civilizational enterprise, his big dreams about literature, and how he kind of heralded a new movement in Hindi literature, how he became father of modernism, how he came at a time when the shadow of Premchand was still there, and he's after Premchand is the most important writer. And knowing about his life is also knowing about is the history of Hindi literature, spread across two world wars, the colonial India, the building of Nehruvian state, and fraying of India's secular fabric as we see it now. So it's not only about the man, it's about the times, it's about his contemporaries, it's about not only about Hindi, it's also about grand alliances that uh, a writer like Agye made with other writers in Indian languages. His the great We see a great move towards translation nowadays, and if you see, Agye is one of the earliest Hindi writers to work consciously towards translation, and with some of the leading translators all over the world, be it in US or be it in Germany. So he took it upon himself that translation was very, very important. So this is the life story of Agay, and it's a very, very exciting life that he led, and which I have tried to kind of write as dispassionately as possible. So we see many shades of Agay in the book. So that's the book is kind of all about, and it also tells you. Um, the divisive nature, the pettiness of the Hindi world, of what went wrong, how, and the grand debates which happened uh, within Hindi literature, and how Agge was at the kind of center of it, right from, if you see, right from the 1940s onwards till 1970s or 80s when he died. He's at the center of almost all the big controversies, almost all the big moves which is happening in Hindi literature. So it's also about that, and how he helped create a completely new generation of writers. He mentored them, and he became a kind of patron saint of Hindi literature. uh, Controversial, maybe. Yes, it was a very controversial thing. It's because, once you become the patron saint, he became that grand messiah of Hindi literature, and that's a phase when we find that Agge's own writing is not what it used to be in the 40s and 50s and 60s. As he's become a kind of a public intellectual who's interested in too many things, who's kind of who's part of the this factionalism of Hindi world in many ways. So the book tries to bring out every all these things about Agay, and then he had a very very, very, you can say, exciting, if I want to, for want a better word, exciting personal life, which had kind of two marriages, many lovers, and he meticulously kept all of it, the records. So it's also about his personal life, and that in that he was very, very different from writers of his generation and even subsequent generation, and that kind of explains why he was always considered an outsider. So the book also tries to look at placing again the larger firmament of Hindi world, and why again one of the biggest regrets of again in the later years was that nobody Hindi world doesn't consider me my own. Because number one, he didn't come from Hindi heartland. He was a Punjabi who grew up all over the country. He had a upbringing which was so very different from uh, his contemporary, of his time, the writers of Hindi writers of his time, most of whom came from mufassil towns, villages. They had a rural background. Agge was growing up all over. His father was a very senior colonial colonial officer in the colonial government. He was an archaeologist and epigraphist, very famous epigraphist, Hiranand Sastri. And therefore, Agge was born in an open field while his father was involved in excavating in Kasya. One of the Buddha's thing he was involved with, and then he grew up in partly Patna, Lucknow, Kashmir, Utkaman. So so that made him he came. So he was a man with a very different experience than his contemporaries, and that's what he wrote, and that's what made him very different from the rest of the writers. He thought differently, and as Premchand's son often used to joke that there are only two Indians misborn in India. One is Nehru, and another is Agye. So he was like, he was not your typical Hindi writer. So those things, so his battles with the Hindi world, how he tries to find a place in a world which is in Hindi world, which is in a way kind to him and yet hostile to him. There is a section which is always hostile to him, especially the Marxists. So that whole ideological battle within the Hindi world, I've tried to bring out. And also, Agya is probably the only Hindi writer about him. There are many myths of Agya, and from both sides, those who don't like him and those who love him. You will find there are myths about Agya. For instance, his this role in whether he was a revolutionary or not, whether he was an agent of the British or not, because a revolutionary of the late 1920s, early 30s, how can he become a British army officer in the 1940s during the Second World War? So these contradictions of Agay, I have tried to bring out. I don't know how successful I have been, but I have tried to bring out. I have to kind of, take out those myths about his life and bring it. So that roughly is the book. It's about him, about the times, about everything. This whole ecosystem, the whole atmosphere of the Hindi world from 1911 to 1987. I have tried to present in the book with Agya very much at the center of it. When I started, I was kind of Agye had always kind of, I have been fascinated by Agye, his contradictions, his grand designs. He's doing things which is so very different from his contemporaries. His writing, everything, he stands out. So luckily he has left a huge body of personal archives, which I was lucky to have to get access to. But then I realized, when I looked at this thousands and thousands of pages, very meticulously kept personal archives, I realized there were still gaps in it. So those gaps, for instance, I was talking earlier about his joining army, or he becoming in the 50s. There was this whole big thing about he being an agent of the CIA, or later on, whether he was revolutionary or not. Thankfully, I found records of all of them. So apart from the personal papers, which is like huge, mammoth, robust, I looked at the archives in his Revolutionary Days archives. I found in National Archives and Delhi State Archives. His whole CIA bit, this alleged CIA connection through Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was a big outfit created by CIA. It's a fact it was created by CIA. It's a fact Agye was the first secretary when they set up office in India in the 1951. He was involved in the very first meeting where writers from all over the world came to in Bombay. But his association ended there, although he maintained personal relations with many of them. So he was not like the way Hindi world was making him out as some kind of an agent, the way we understand, spies and all that. No, he was not. And if you look at uh, it's a very divisive post-World War, post-Second World War. The world is ideologically divided. America is worried about the rising tide of communism, and the CCF comes. It's not a justification, but it was a part of the larger ideological battle um, which was taking place with against communism, the spread of communism. And Agay, like many other writers, the very first meeting, you'll be surprised. The people who came, all the big writers were there of that time. Agay was there. Big politicians were there. Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay was there. B.R. Ambedkar was there. All the Jayaprakash Narayan was there. So it was a big meeting, and to just pick him out and say that he was an agent is kind of trying to be a little unkind. But then I found the records of the Congress for Cultural Freedom papers in Chicago, Chicago archives, Chicago University archives. Then some of his friends that he made, for instance, Nicholas Nabokov, who was a cousin of Vladimir Nabokov, and he was friends with Agay through CCF. I found his records in Stanford. Then some bit of records are in New York. So all those things I found, which just to fill the gaps, those just to kind of see how much it is a myth or not. Then, even with the revolutionary years that he was in jail, which is a fact, he was in jail. He spent nearly 4 years in jail. And a very young man, he's just out of BA, he's in MA, and he gets arrested. And that's how Sekhar comes. Sekhar Ek Jeevani, his classic 2 volume, comes out of his experience. The fear of uh, death sentence, a capital punishment, which might happen. And it's a young man who's writing this novel. It's all written in jail. It's a remarkable novel, and it's kind of survived. It's a classic of all times, one of the best Hindi novels of all time. Uh, so then that also revolutionary days, I found records, and it's a very, very big archives. Now you asked about what do you leave and what do you keep. Uh, well, you tend to, the problem with writers is, and I face that problem, and I'm a kind of, I have no problem confessing that, you think that everything that you're writing is cast in stone and it's like can't be changed and all that. So, few things I kind of overwrote, which I have very ruthless editors who are my great friends. So, like editors like Ajita and Sonal and others who were like, just no, this can't go. You can't be writing for yourself. Yet, book became very big. Uh, I had to leave out a lot, especially if you look at some of his relationships with Hindi world. Um then his relations, and then his kind of the making of some of his works. So you leave out things which you find that there is a process involved in how Agay writes, and so you can't be repeating about every book that he's writing. It's more or less the same process, the way he writes, what he does. So those things got left. Those things I had to leave behind. A lot of things I had to leave behind. If someone wants to kind of write another book on Agay with many things which I have left out, there can be. And now the papers have found a very safe home in Asoka University. So those archives are there. And so there can be another book on Agay, and why not? Despite just the size of this book shouldn't matter. So there are still aspects of it which I have left out. So yeah, that's one thing. Yeah, some all books do that to you. In anything you're involved with a subject for 5 years, or individual for 5 years, you get consumed by the person. And these are like extraordinary figures, be it Agay or the JP that I'm working on. These are extraordinary figures. You get consumed by few things. Only thing you have to keep reminding is to keep that safe distance. Safe distance, so that you don't become that person's spokesperson. You don't start defending him for what he did or not did. You can't have a guy, uh, who's a great man, who's kind of limitations, his contradictions, his the way he's dealing with women. All these things should come out. So it does change you. in a way, because you see these are extraordinary figures. You're constantly reading them, but you have to constantly remind yourself. You have to keep that distance. You don't have to at any point come to this, that, oh, this is a very unpalatable fact about Agge and it should not come out, you know. So that one should just not brush anything under the carpet. So even if you are see, a person has to be influenced or fascinated by the character to spend 5 years. You that you choose to do it, you know what you're getting into, but then not everything about that person would be something which the world wants to know, or but as a biographer, is it your job to defend him? Is it your job to hide that information? No, I don't think so. So therefore, yeah, while I got consumed by him, I reread him. I reread all his work so many times. I saw new meaning in many of them. But then as a person, I found that he's deeply flawed too. His relationship with women, for instance, be it his sisters, be it his lovers, is highly problematic. I'm not being judgmental. And I have mostly used things that his lovers are telling him. He's extractive in relationship, but that should come out. And thankfully, many women readers, writers, and all who read have kind of said that, oh, you have been kind of little unkind to him when it comes to relationship. So while you're completely fascinated by the character while writing, uh, you have to constantly remind yourself it's not your job to defend him. Even if all the flaws of Agya comes out, his greatness will not be taken away, because it only makes him, it humanizes him to this whole Hindi world. This one section which considers him God, another section which considers him demon. There is a Agya in between, who is deeply flawed, who's genius in many ways. He's taking giant strides in literature. He's creating a whole new language of literature in Hindi. He's challenging the existing Hindi world. So there is that Agya too. And why do I have to kind of give him character certificate? Well, my only thing was that don't kind of perpetuate myths about him. Bring out facts. So it should be you. So you will find in the book that almost 99% of the things are footnoted. There is only two, three. I did interview of like some 60 people I interviewed. Eventually, I used only two, three, because I realized that they were verifiable facts. Rest of them, people were just saying things for the heck of it. So I didn't rely on them. Only things that I could verify, I used. So yeah, so that was kind of about the process. As for the readers for this book, anyone who's interested in what was happening in not only Hindi literature, but also Indian literature. How was this whole period of 1920s to 40s, when there is an intense struggle happening against the colonial government, the contradictions of it? How is Hindi world reacting to it? What was, again, this whole, the Hindi world or the Indian literature's reaction, literary world's reaction to the Second World War, when Agate takes this position that I'll go join the army because fascism is a bigger thing, bigger enemy than colonial government. Colonial government will go; it's on its last legs. But so he decides to do a a revolutionary of the 30s becomes a kind of a British soldier. So anyone who wants to know what was happening in Indian literature, what were the grand debates, what were the larger debates, because these debates are not confined to Hindi literature alone. These are the debates which is kind of affecting other Indian languages too. For instance, what should be the role of state? Relationship between state and literature. How should state be awarding literary prizes? And the setting up of these institutions through life of Agya, you can see how these new institutions which are coming for Sahitya Academy, for instance, Aggay's role in it, how this big literary meetings that are taking place, uh, this Asian Writers Conference in India, in USSR of those days, and how and in which writers from all languages are involved. So I guess life tells you about that. Then it also tells you about how larger thing, which one of the thing I learned from that era, reading and writing about that era, was uh, that despite deep differences, very very serious differences, there was civility in the air, in the conversation, in the literary world, be it writers from English writers from Karnataka attacking Agge for his constant criticism of English writers. There is a great deal of civility. They are arguing with each other on the pages of a journal. They are not getting. It's not a petty fight. Pettiness, if any, is within the Hindi world, which is a very different story. But the Agge's life also tells you how these interactions were happening. You know, among Indian languages. Agge himself, funnily enough, had a pen name called Kuti Chatan, which is a Malayalam word, which means, in a way, a friendly ghost. So those things were happening. So Agge's life is not only about Hindi, it's about the times, it's about Indian history of Indian languages, the interactions, and also how a new republic, a new Indian Republic, 1950, is building institutions of learning, of culture. So Agge's life tells you all about that. Yeah. So the legacy of Agge is that he taught Hindi world to think differently. He taught Hindi world to challenge the existing grammar of literature, and he was the first one who was thinking not only of himself as a writer, but the larger community of writers, and uh, that's one thing you think has been carried forward now, if you see, by someone like Ashok Bajpai, who again who he knew again very well, right from his 16-year-old to later on. That's one of the biggest legacy of Agge, his allowing that nothing is sacrosanct. Anything can be challenged, and he was constantly challenging. He gave a new language. He brought in new poets, new writers, and later on, if we see this Nai Kahani movement, also had which Nirmal Verma, Mohan Rakesh, all these writers came. Uh, they had a lot to thank Agge for that. Although Agge, as a short story writer, had stopped writing after a while, after he did some 50 odd short stories, but they were all in a way influenced by Agge. Nirmal Verma, for one, not so much Mohan Rakesh, but yes, Nirmal Verma for one. He created a whole new generation, which now we find there's a whole generation of writers which is influenced by um, Nirmal Verma. So that all that continued. So that's his legacy. Agge continues, and as I was saying, as one fun fact is that Agge still is one of the most popular subjects for PhD across Hindi departments. In India and even abroad, he continues to be uh, read, taught. I saw that last in Berkeley. I saw that in UPenn, and so he continues to live as much as he did when he was there, and his books. So he continues to be part of the discussion of Hindi literature. Yeah.